Okay, welcome to part two of your Lightroom Basics tutorial here. We have a couple things to get done here. Two main things is really, the first main thing is to sort of get to know Lightroom. And some of this isn't necessarily going to be a doing. You might be watching the video and sort of following along with the catalog that hopefully you have created. The one sort of doing thing that potentially you'll be doing later after you've shot your 50 images of line and 50 images of shape is creating printing a slideshow that you're going to hand in. Remember, project one sort of has two parts where you're shooting 50 images of line, 50 images of shape. That's going to be handed in as a group of 100 images. The second part is going to be sort of calling out 10 images of line, 10 images of shape, sort of your top 10 of those 50 images. Okay. Again, you might be sort of watching this again to sort of get to that slideshow or sort of understanding how to make the slideshow. So, without further ado, let's take a look. We're in the library now. We've imported. This is basically picking up where I left off on the last video with the import. Let's take a look. On the left hand side here you have what's called the navigator. This is going to allow you to either change one quick thing, fit or fill, or potentially zoom in on an object, move around an object. Okay, there's two tiny arrows that you can sort of change the aspect ratio, meaning you can zoom in and out of an image. Okay, that's the navigator. Often you're going to just be hitting fit or fill. These panels, both the left hand side and the right hand side, often have these drop down menus. If you're new to Lightroom, you might sort of close these up so you can sort of understand where you are, okay, and just deal with one at a time. Also note that there's tiny little arrows, and I'm circling one there and one here, that you can click and sort of get rid of a whole side panel if you want. Okay, you want to get rid of that. You want to sort of use the space a little bit more, especially once you get into editing. You might very well want to get rid of a panel depending on the size of the screen you're working on, etc. Okay, so we have the navigator. Okay, we can move around things. We click. We can zoom in. I'm dragging this square around so I can see sort of a specific area. Okay, go back. I'm going to close that up. The next thing to look at is what's called the catalog. This basically is information about your catalog. Later you're going to be making collections of images and dealing with what's called a quick collection, where you're sort of taking this one image, or sorry, 10 images in the case of your project one, and making what's called a quick collection. You're just sort of setting them aside, and then you might make them what's called a permanent collection down here. Okay, I wouldn't worry about your folders or the published services right now. This is sort of putting stuff to Facebook or Flickr. We might do some of that later. Okay, so next things to look at are down here are what are considered different ways to view things. I can click on this grid view, and that's going to show me a lot of images. Okay, over on the right hand side I can change the size of those images. Maybe I want to see things a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. I can change that size. Once I'm sort of getting into a project, I might hit on this loop view. This is just viewing things in a singular fashion. Okay, you can use the arrows on your keyboard to move sort of back and forth amongst those images. You will notice as and I'm moving the keyboard right now, when I move the arrows on the keyboard down here in what's called the film strip, I am moving through that set of images. Okay. Two other sort of views are compare and survey. These are when you're sort of deciding on this one or that one sort of thing, and that might be useful once you start choosing whether or not you want to include a certain image in a collection or a final grouping. Okay, so to review, we have the navigator up here. We have your catalog, which notes sort of the last images that have come in with this previous import. It's where your quick collections are going to happen. And then your collections, which are often will come from your quick collection, meaning that you save a quick collection, then you might save that as sort of like a more permanent version. And again, we'll go over that next week. Okay, we have our film strip down here. We have our different viewing options in terms of grid and loop. Those are probably the most important. Okay. Now, next thing, let's hit up on our develop module here. These are our sort of modules. You'll notice that for the most part things stay the same over here. Collections. I'm going to pull one thing down, that history. And just like any other panel, when we're on history over on the right hand side, you're going to have a bunch of stuff come up. This is sort of overwhelming if you've never worked with Lightroom before, but I'm going to sort of just briefly introduce two things over here. First is the histogram, okay? And I'm going to look at one particular image here. Pop over this image. This is a visual representation of where my pixels are in this photograph. So if I scroll over here, you'll see that it says blacks right down there. If I scroll over here, it says whites. So this is a spectrum from dark to light. It's no surprise that most of the pixels, meaning the sort of mountain of pixels here, live in the middle. They're sort of middle tones. If we were to have a very, very dark image, they would be all the way over to the left. If we had a very light image, they'd be all the way over to the right. Okay, this is a visual representation of where the pixels are. Later we're going to get into sort of changing this, setting it, doing some things to it that we want to alter where these pixels sort of live. Okay, I'm going to close up that and then pull down the basic. Basic is where some basic developing happens. Okay, we're going to deal with a lot of the specifics of this basic panel next week. But you should know that this is where it lives. Okay. When we do an adjustment, and I'm going to do a simple exposure adjustment, and I pulled down this history over on the right hand side, this is where everything gets recorded. Remember, we are not drastically or sort of permanently changing pixels in Lightroom. Okay, unlike something like Photoshop, where you're permanently changing it, it's called destructive editing. This is not doing that. It's simply recording it. And sort of making a note of it. It's saying, okay, Dave did a exposure adjustment. I don't like that. I want to sort of change back to the original. Over here on the right hand side, I can hit reset and I go back to my original. Okay, that's the beauty of Lightroom. Remember, this catalog, this davidluke.lrcat, just points to those images that live in a separate folder. The LRCat records all this information. And you can see I've already done a few things to this photograph. It's recording all of that information. Okay. Now, that's the sort of very, very basics of library and develop. The next thing I want to do is come over to slideshow. And this is what you guys are going to be doing for your 100 images as well as your 10 images. I'm going to have some specifics on your 10 images in terms of size, but for your 100 images, what we have to do basically, and when we hit that slideshow module, you'll see there's tons of options here. So I'm going to go through these. I basically want them, Lightroom sort of puts a lot of these defaults down, and some of them are cheesy and some of them are unnecessary. I want to turn a lot of these off. So I'm going to just go through these very, very quickly. Stroke border I'm going to turn off. Cast shadow I'm going to turn off. Show guide should be off. Identity plate I want off because your file name is going to be how I sort of know what your file is. Rating stars I want off. Text overlay I want off. And then the only thing is a backdrop, basically a color wash of some sort of gray. And you can sort of pick that, and the default is going to be just fine. You can keep that at 100%. This is basically saying you're putting an image on a gray background. Okay, let's take off, let's leave that background color on. And titles, ending screen, turn that off. And then playback, let's see here, turn off that blank other screens and then leave the repeat. So the repeat and the backdrop are the only things you're going to have sort of check mark. Basically, and you'll see I'm just scrolling through these. These are all turned off. They're wanting to put rating stars and overlays and shadows and all sorts of stuff. I just want to see your images. Okay, that's the most important thing. So we're in Slideshow. Slideshow has this option. This is how we're going to see your images. Over here on the left hand side, when you're in Slideshow, you should see something that says Export PDF. I'm going to click that. Okay. And I am inside my digital photography folder. Okay. And you should be naming this, I believe it's David Luke underscore project 1. Okay. Now, we do not want to type in .pdf. That's going to be added directly to it. Okay. It's going to be added because we're saving this as a PDF. Down here at the bottom, you'll see quality. This is, if any of you have ever worked in Photoshop, this is a JPEG compression sort of thing, meaning that you're compressing the file size. And that's a good thing for sort of transporting, saving, uploading lots of images at once. Okay, so we're going to set that to 60. And then I'm going to change this common size to 640 by 480. Okay, that's quite small in terms of file sizes and sizes of photographs. But again, this might be this is what you're doing basically for your 100 images. So we need to sort of make these smaller and easier to deal with. So I'm going to hit export. And you'll see up here it says export slideshow to PDF, and it's exporting those things. And we'll sort of let it go. Task completed. I'm going to go find this. And there's my PDF. Double click on that, and depending on if you have a Mac or a PC, get this within the window. Here is my file of, in my case, 17 images. Okay, you guys are going to be handing in your grouping of 100 images. Okay, you'll note on the Project 1 file, it says 50 images of line, 50 images of shape. That's Project 1. Project 1 requires that you go out and shoot line and shape. I understand that people are probably going to shoot that all together. You are going to hand in 100 images of all of that. Okay, so shoot 50 of line approximately and 50 of shape approximately. Okay, meaning you should have 100 images. If you have 44 images of line and 56 that sort of constitute shape, that is okay. Okay, I don't need you to spend time sort of organizing them separately into line and shape. Okay. One last thing to note, and I just wanted to make sure I reiterated something in relation to importing. I'm going to go to File, Import Photos and Video. If you're someone, and I know some of you are going to be doing this, if you take pictures with a school camera or with a camera that's not something you can bring in and plug directly into the computer you use in Lightroom with, note that over here on the left hand side when you do an import, your source can be a disk. Okay, so you might have a USB or a flash drive that has a folder in it called Project 1 Images. That's going to be where you're coming from, and strangely enough you might be going to that same disk, but it's likely going to be a different folder. Okay, in your case it might be, you should be sort of selecting your digital photography folder. Okay, it's still, you can't just throw your images into a different folder over here and expect them to pop up in Lightroom. We need to import them into the catalog. Okay, so what I did was use the camera as the source and go to my disk. You may be using a disk and going to the destination, which is the exact same disk. Okay, so depending on what you're going to use, ideally I think it's easiest to use a camera so you can sort of see it going from the camera into the folder and thus into the library in Lightroom. Okay, so for next week, see the actions on the weekly handout, mainly shooting 50 images of line, 50 images of shape. You're also to watch that Ansel Adams movie and participate in this discussion. Any questions, please email me.